Hello there, and welcome to another series called Creating a Naturalistic Language. In this first episode, we will be creating a system for tense, mood, and aspect. But before we do that, we will be discussing the goals of this conlang. First off, to explain my goals for this, I will explain the setting in which it is to be created in. On the island of Lobrosia, also known as the Land of Scholars, knowledge and the preservation of it is the utmost virtue. The island is rather small, only reaching roughly 50 square miles in size. The island is alone in the world, as it is extremely rough seas do not allow for large vessels to reach even a mile out to sea. Only small fishing vessels have ever been able to venture into the shallows and return. Lobrosia also only has 1,000-some residents exactly at any time. This is due to strict restriction related to the food supplies available on the island. On this island, preservation of resources is key, which has led to insanely intuitive inventions to better the quality of life. The island is a community where everyone has a task for the betterment of the society that they must perform. Some are farmers, some are fishermen, some are miners, but overall, the highest class out of them all is the scholars, who are credited with their very existence. Without them, they believe they wouldn't have made it this far. In summary, the island's government is a love child between capitalist class systems and socialist ideals. Now that we have the setting explained, we can discuss the reasoning behind this new language. In the simplest explanation, the language that has been used for thousands of years has outgrown its use and has become so watered down with evolutionary changes over time that it is deemed impractical for scholarly works. That is why the scholars have decided that they will create a new language to use for their projects. They had a consensus that the language must represent knowledge itself, square and straight to the point, while at the same time being fluid and dynamic in the path between each discovery. And to express this, I prepared an image to show what I mean. Alright, that should do for the setting and the story behind the language. Now we can move into the goals for this language. I will quickly list them and discuss them in detail afterwards. The language will have a two-part verb conjugation system. Rather than to add affixes to the verb to express tense, mood, and aspect, we will have the verb as one word and following it another word which is a collection of affixes to form the tense, mood, and aspect of the preceding verb. The language will have descriptive tenses and aspects to make the meaning of the sentences clear. The language will be artificially made to look as though it is naturalistic, not naturally evolving over time, but evolves within a controlled environment to ensure the purpose of the language isn't lost as quickly over time. There will be many hard consonants in the phonology. There will also be many diphthongs. The writing system will be flowing top to bottom and will utilize ink pens as the medium. Diacritics, rather than separate words, will mark the conjugation of verbs in the writing system, but in the Romanized system, the conjugation of the verb will be two words. The default word order will be subject, object, verb, or SOV. And lastly, it will be a strictly head-final language. To further explain the system, I will be using for the verb conjugation. Allow me to give an example. Let us say that the unmarked singular of did, or rock, in the language, combined with the following word gives it its conjugation. So if M shows past tense and amal shows the indicative mood, then emamal would be the conjugation for past tense indicative verb. Let us say the simple is unmarked in that the order of the affixes is mood, then tense, then aspect. So it would actually be emalum, not emamal. So in conclusion, rock emalum would be the past indicative form of do, or in other words, did, but in a factual sense. That is the system which I want to base a lot of this language around, having auxiliaries to mark the actual verb rather than to just modify the verbs. Now for the tense aspects and moods, After some consideration, I have narrowed down the list of which tenses, aspects, and moods we will use for this language. The tenses will be past, present, future, necessitive, and conditional. The aspects will be simple, continuous, also called progressive sometimes, perfect simple, and perfect continuous, sometimes called perfect progressive. The moods will be imperative, indicative, subjunctive, and exclamative. As I look back on my decisions for the numbers of tenses, aspects, and moods, I realize in comparison to many other real-world languages that it is actually a pretty normal amount of tenses, as well as a cookie-cutter aspect chart and a basic mood chart. But I have grown to like it. Despite the slight deviation from the plan, I will canonize this by saying that the group of scholars were locked onto their usual way of speaking and writing, which followed these same tenses, and it carried over into their work. It is always good to have an explanation for the deviations in a language and world building in general. Know the rules before you break the rules. To cover the statement that I want a lot of diphthongs in this language, I will explain for those of you who don't know what a diphthong is. It literally means two sounds. It is the combination of two phones or sounds and the sounds that they make, such as ah, oo, or a. Diphthongs can be used with two consonants too, rather than vowels, such as s, cl, and tl. But these are slightly rarer and aren't considered diphthongs, but rather phones of themselves. I want to use a lot of these. I also want many hard consonants in the language, which will contrast from the flowing and elegant writing system which we will implement in a later video. Speaking of the writing system, I want to use a top-down writing system, utilizing diacritics to conjugate verbs. However, when we write the language in Romanized form, we will use the two-word system I have covered a minute or two ago. Additionally, they have access to ink, so quill pens will be used for the writing medium. Again, the default word order will be SOV, or subject, object, verb, and it will be a primarily head-final language, using pre-noun adjectives, postpositions, and the possessor comes before the possessee. To cover why this is not an artificial language rather than a naturalistic language, I will reiterate that the first part of this series will be making an artificial language, but the second half will be covering the actual naturalistic evolution of this language after it's already made. To be clear, the first part of this series is to show how making an artificial language can look naturalistic. For the sake of this video as well, I will create the tense, aspect, and mood system, how they conjugate. This chart you see is the mood chart, which I made first because it comes first in the auxiliary, if I can call it that. This is subject to massive changes, as I have yet to determine a phonology for this language, so some of the sounds might not even exist when created. This chart you see is the tense chart, which comes second in the order of the word. And this chart you see is the aspect chart, which comes last in the word. Now, together, these are all three. If we combined one of each, we would get an auxiliary, which could mean one of many things as a whole. So let us use an example. An imperative past continuous verb would be kralenepomesh. You would put this word after the basic form of a verb, and it would modify it. So let us say walk is dorak. So dorak kralenepomesh in the context of a sentence would be you must have been walking. The must have been and the ing, which precedes walk, is where the chronolepomush, the past tense continuous imperative verb, is modified. So the verb dorak is modified by chronolepomush, which tells you that it is a past imperative continuous verb. So we get "you must have been walking" in a sentence. Now, with that out of the way, I think that is enough for today. Until next time, stay safe and have fun. I'll see y'all later. Bye.